Welcome to the January 11th, 2022 Planning Commission meeting. I would like to ask for patience as we conduct our virtual meeting. There may be slight delays as we transition between speakers, presentations, and participants. If any participants have issues with the technology, please send a message to the moderator, Ray. We have 7 discussion items on our agenda today. As usual, I would ask for a focus with each discussion to allow us to get through the entire agenda. I would ask the commissioners to hold all questions until the conclusion of all presentations and any public comments. Finally, please be recognized by the chairperson before speaking. Before we start the agenda, I wanted to note that we have one case today, case number Z5721 along New Bern Avenue, where we've received a number of emails noting specific concerns about localized flooding and stormwater runoff and traffic concerns. As we begin to manage our agendas more effectively, I'll note that this is one case that might benefit from being discussed at the Infrastructure and Mobility Committee. Commissioner Bennett, as chair of that committee, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Thank you, Chair Fox. No, I agree with you. I think this is one that we could discuss in infrastructure and mobility. That's fine with me if it's fine with the commission.
Okay, I believe we can take a motion. So I will make a motion to move Z5721 to our Infrastructure and Mobility Committee, which meets the 3rd Thursday of the month. Do I have a second? Okay, Commissioner Bennett offers a second. Because this is not the final disposition of this particular case, I will ask for a show of hands and I will announce the outcome at the end of the vote. Those in favor of moving Z5721 to committee, show your hands, please. Okay, any opposed? No, the motion passes unanimously. Moving back to the agenda, we start every meeting with an opportunity for the public to comment on an item not contained on the agenda. We have no one signed up for general public comment today. Moving on to old business, there are 2 items listed under the old business portion of the agenda. Both of these items have been previously discussed and we have received presentations and heard from the public. So we will begin with a short update from staff, focusing on the revisions to the request. Item C.1 is case number Z4121. This is a request to rezone approximately 1.69 acres near the intersections of South Bloodworth and East Cabarrus Streets from downtown mixed-use 3 stories detached with historic overlay district general to downtown mixed-use 3 stories urban general. The HOD, the Prince Hall Historic Overlay District, is proposed to be removed from the 9 parcels. The rezoning request also includes conditions prohibiting certain uses otherwise allowed in the DX district. The item was discussed at our November 23rd meeting and deferred to allow the Raleigh Historic Development Commission time to meet to discuss the rezoning. A memo summarizing RHDC recommendation is included in the backup. I'd like to start with a staff update from Ira Mabel.
Yes, good morning, everyone. Ira Mabel speaking. I'm going to stick to just to refresh you on the zoning case. I believe we have a representative of staff and also the chair of the Historic District Commission. So you have questions about their discussion. So I will say that your deadline is for action is January 22nd. So if you do not wish to make a motion on this case, you must ask for extension from council. Can go to the next slide, please. Just keep this really brief. This is the photo of the aerial of the site showing the current structures there, mostly occupied by the daycare center. Next slide. Where the site sits in location in reference to the historic district. Next slide. The single condition, so this has not changed. So theoretically, if the applicant wished to make changes, they still could. Bite the apple one time, to borrow a craniism. Next slide, please. The case is consistent with the future land use map, but inconsistent with the plan overall. Go to the next slide. Really, I guess I took that out. Those policies really have to do with historic preservation and some urban design. Although it's consistent with the urban form map, being downtown, a lot of the design down here is different from that. So that is all I have. So not really any update to the zoning case. You did defer waiting to hear from RHTC, and they did recommend denial. So I'd be happy to answer any questions, or like I say, other staff is present.
Thank you, Mr. Mabel. We've already heard from the applicant team, so I'd like to bring it back to the table to allow for questions and comments from commissioners. Do any commissioners have any questions or comments? Seeing none, I'll start off with one broad-based question of staff. Our discussion so far has been focusing on the removal of the HOD, but what I'd like to do is hear a little bit more about that change from the detached frontage to the urban general frontage, specifically the building types that are allowed when you change that frontage requirement.
Sure. I'm gonna pull up, pardon me while I pull up that page of the UDO to make sure I remember precisely what's not allowed in detached. Right, so the existing zoning and a lot of the other zoning on that block has detached frontage, which allows, detached buildings, basically all 4 residential buildings. What it does not allow is mixed use or general buildings. So really not designed for things with commercial on the first floor at all. And the urban general is a bit opposite, so does allow those 2, also townhouses and apartments, but does not allow detached or attached. So quite a bit different on the upper and lower bounds of the building type spectrum, so to speak. So townhouses and apartments could be built in either. I will also say that civic buildings are allowed basically everywhere, I think. So, and it's potentially, I'm not quite sure what the daycare would be considered. That might be a question for zoning administration. But civic buildings generally allow for schools and churches in residential districts basically everywhere. So the big difference is really whether or not there's the area is envisioned for commercial on the first floor, on the ground floor, or not.
Is someone from staff available to answer that last question?
This is the question regarding the daycare as a use.
Yes.
So there's a distinction in the UDO between building type and use. You have a building type that is permitted, such as a single family house, and you convert its use for a daycare for a use that's permitted in the underlying zoning district. That's fine. If you were building a new building that would meet the classification of a general building for the purposes of housing the daycare, that would run afoul of the frontage because the building type is not allowed. So in the UDO, and I know it's sort of an interesting distinction, but the building type can function somewhat independently of the use. You could put a commercial use in a detached building type. We have many of those in the detached frontage where old houses have been converted, say, into law offices. The use would normally not be permitted in, say, a residential zone, but it is permitted in the commercial zoning. The detached frontage allows you to put it into a structure that was built as a residential structure that's been converted, but not to build a purpose-built commercial building in that frontage. I hope that answers the question.
That does, thank you.
Pardon me, Madam Chair, this is Ira speaking again. So just looking back through the description of civic building, a civic building type does say daycare center. So I think they could construct a daycare most likely under either frontage.
Thank you, Ira.
Yep.
Are there any additional questions or comments from commissioners? Commissioner Bennett?
Yes, Chair Fox, can you just drill down what we just said? I'm trying to follow it and I'm a little bit confused. So can you just, for the non-architects on the commission, can you just kind of break it down for me, please?
I'll allow staff to do the summary.
Sure.
Yeah.
Right. So the way your building is designed is regulated differently from what you can use it for. So the rezoning change here is changing from one frontage to another, and that a frontage is how we control design elements in Raleigh. So the frontage that's there today is called detached. It's meant for like what is more like single family neighborhoods. So it doesn't allow commercial only building types, which means you design a building for no one to live inside. And they're requesting a frontage, which is the opposite really, which does not allow single family homes, but does allow commercial only buildings. So there's a bit of a cross policies in the comprehensive plan. This site is downtown, which does generally recommend more urban and does allow commercial only buildings. So the request fits with all the policies saying about what downtown should look like. But it is in a historic neighborhood, which is not built like that today. So there are other policies that say they should be matching the context. Specifically policy UD 1.10 says if there's other frontages on your block, you should try to match those. And so there is a lot of detached existing today because of matching the character in the historic district.
Right, I got it.
So
Thank you. Thank you, Ira.
Sure.
And one other piece, Ira, while we still have you, if I'm not mistaken, the detached frontage needs to follow the infill guidelines, but the urban general frontage does not. Is that an accurate statement?
Infill does not apply to DX.
The DE.
Generally.
But doesn't it by frontage?
I can check on that for you to make
Okay,
sure.
thank you. While we're looking for that, are there any additional questions or comments from commissioners? Just a reminder, the applicant is available and we also have RHDC staff and the RHDC chair. Commissioner Rains.
Thanks, Chair Fox. I've been struggling with this one since the first time we heard it. I understand the policy of urbanization and creating atmosphere for downtown district, but if there wasn't an HOD, I'd probably be more amenable to the case as it's the applicant. But since there's context, it's in place. It is a HOD. I'm trying to struggle what priority takes place for this. Is it the HOD? Is it the comprehensive plan policy that incentivizes, dense development and change in frontage? But this is just a comment. I'm leaning toward keeping the HOD as a priority and identifying this as a opportunity to keep the context and in place. So those are just comments. I don't have any questions.
Thank you, Commissioner Rains. Are there any additional questions or comments from commissioners? Commissioner Miller?
Thank you. And I apologize for being late this morning. Had to drop off my son. I know that when we reviewed this previously, there was talk about how this was a newer HOD and that there was some concern at the time about agreement amongst the neighbors that whether this should be an HOD. And I was just wondering, what is the process for removing an HOD generally over a whole district? Is there any way to do it other than piecemeal rezoning?
I can. So the historic overlay is a zoning district, so there's really no other way to do it. Either create, modify, or remove than the rezoning process. I'll ask Colette if she can think of other examples where an HOD was removed entirely. I'll say the Prince Hall has been modified once. Some properties were removed. There is an extra step where the RHDC submits a report to the state to review like the historic character of the area. So that's an extra step on the rezoning process, but generally, it is a local district, so the regular rezoning rules are how to do it. Any change to
Gotcha.
it.
So when it's created, to create the HOD, is it a neighbor petition and other steps?
I believe they can happen all sorts of ways. Maybe Colette can go through some typical processes.
I guess I wanted to say at high level, if that's correct, that it is sort of a neighbor petition, and maybe there were a certain number of neighbors at the time that wanted it, but then in the future there's fewer neighbors that want the district to exist at all. It just trying to figure out how to how to evaluate the nature of an HOD and whether sort of meeting the initial criteria of having a certain percentage of the neighbors still want it to exist
So,
versus not in the future.
so I would draw a slight distinction between, say, an HOD and an NCOD. An NCOD is something that typically is petitioned for by a neighborhood, and it doesn't really have a broader public purpose beyond the fact that the neighborhood wants to preserve for itself a certain built character. An HOD has embedded within it this sort of larger public purpose, which is preserving part of the city's built history. And so it's been treated a little bit differently. It has a different, the NCOD is just a locally created tool that uses the general enabling authority, and historic overlay district as a special enabling authority because there's considered more of a citywide interest in such things as historic preservation. I won't get into a big philosophical discussion of that, but it is somewhat different. So it's less tied to a sort of petition process because it's not really about a neighborhood doing something for itself. It's about the city preserving its built history.
Well taken. Thank you.
This is Ira again. I do have an answer to the infill question. So there is a section of the UDO for residential infill that applies to residential districts that has a number of standards, setback height, parking surface area. The detached frontage, the setback standard applies. That's the only one. So the other sidewall heights, et cetera, don't apply, but they have to meet the average setback on the block, measuring, a couple houses down in either direction. Theoretically, this is on the corner, but in general, would have to meet the average setback of what's existing.
So to summarize or say that another way, one of the intents of the detached frontage is to be more contextually sensitive. Would that be accurate?
I think the intent of all the frontages is to be contextually sensitive. It's just what context is what they're designed for.
Okay.
So detached.
That helps.
Yeah.
Okay. Do we have any additional questions or comments from commissioners? Commissioner Bennett?
Thank you. I just want to say briefly, because I gave pretty extensive comments the last time we heard this one. So, and my comments are pretty consistent with what Commissioner Rain said. This one's a bit of a struggle, but what tips the scale for me is the HOD and the priority on preserving communities like this. And I just feel like this would set a precedent that I don't necessarily want to set. And I think it is important to preserve Raleigh's history. I've spoken about that often. And so that's what tips the scale for me. It's I don't have any issues at all with the use or the importance of that use to the community. It sounds like a great use, and it's been there for a while, and it's been an asset to the community, and sounds like it will continue to be an asset to the community. So I don't have any issue with that at all. It's just is this the right forum to, pull all of those parcels out an area that is protected, and it's protected for a reason. And I often speak about preservation, particularly for communities like this that are slowly disappearing from our history. So with that in mind, I'm of the same opinion that I was the last time, that I'm not in favor of pulling these parcels out of the HOD.
Thank you, Commissioner Bennett. Commissioner O'Haver, I saw your hand.
Yeah, I think we're all struggling with the same issues here. I went back and pulled up my notes because it's been a while and the holidays, some cobwebs up there. But there are a couple things. I mean, we keep talking about preserving the history, but I in this block throughout history. So my question in the last meeting was at what point do we put a pin in history and say, this is the history we're going to preserve? Because
Is anyone else having issues hearing his audio? Your audio is going out, in and out, Commissioner O'Haver.
it seems like I'm having some problems with my internet.
Okay. I think what your comment was getting to touches on the nature of historic preservation as a profession and as a policy. I'm wondering just very quickly if historic preservation staff or if our HDC chair would want to answer this. Talk to me a little bit about the character essay for this district. That might be helpful in answering or responding to some of the comments Commissioner O'Haver was trying to make.
Hello, everyone. This is Colette Canane, Preservation Planner. So Prince Hall is unique in that it is our only mixed use character historic district. So it does have commercial properties as well as residential properties. They are on the majority smaller scale structures, but we do have a few taller buildings. The Masonic Lodge being one of those that the applicant did use in the example for their COA application. So there is a significant amount of diversity in the neighborhood and a range of building ages as well. So the period of significance extends to about the 1950s, early 1960s. So there's a wide range of resources in the neighborhood.
Thank you, Colette. Commissioner O'Haver?
Sorry, just give me a thumbs up. Can you hear me? Okay. So yeah, so I guess I was just saying, at what point do we put a pin in history? I feel like the applicant did a good job of showing all the different uses. I also really struggle with, we're talking about piecemealed. I had some pretty pointed questions about how that boundary was even developed. I mean, it's not like it's the entire area. I mean, there's an alleyway in there. Other parcels have been pulled out. And so I understand the significance. Again, I live in a historic district, but you know, I was thinking that when it was going to be what the issues were with the proposed plan. I mean, I remember that they said it was modeled scale wise after the Prince Hall building, which is there. And so I understand that the applicant had spent months and months working on this. Again, I think that the use is appropriate. So while again, I'm struggling with it, I'm leaning towards approval. So I'll just end there. So hopefully y'all could hear everything and my internet's not crapping out.
I believe
Chair,
we caught it. Thank you.
Chair, if I may follow up on that.
Yes, thank you.
Sure. So a little bit about the COA application process for this property. The applicant did attend several Design Review Advisory Committee meetings, DRAC. DRAC is an advisory voluntary body that is created to advise COA applicants about what potential obstacles they may encounter throughout their COA process. So the applicants did attend, as we typically recommend for new construction applications, since they are significantly larger projects, and received feedback from DRAC. I believe they attended twice. over a span of several months as they were working on their project design. And then when they submitted their COA application, they attended one COA committee meeting. The COA committee deferred the application to allow the applicant to provide additional information to answer some questions the committee had. There were a few discrepancies in the site plans that they needed answers to help make their decision. So the committee deferred the application. It was at the April 2021 meeting. And the application was withdrawn by the applicant at mid-May, I believe, before their next meeting. So the COA committee did not end up making a decision on the application. It was withdrawn by the applicant.
Thank you. And just also for clarification, Ms. Kinane, while we have you, new builds in a historic district seeking a COA for massing are often approved or approvable at this phase. Is that correct? I don't know if you can answer that.
Yes, that is, I'd say, generally correct. As long as the committee has the information they need to evaluate the application against the design guidelines for historic districts, certainly the application could be approved. I guess I will add, since you mentioned massing, the applicant did elect to go through a two-part COA process, where the first phase is solely for the footprint, the massing, and the height of the building, and would have followed up if the application had been approved with a second COA application that did the architectural details, the fenestration pattern, all of the site features. I will also add that the application did include the demolition of a few properties. In North Carolina, demolition cannot be denied. It can be delayed for a period of 365 days if the structure is character defining or significant to the neighborhood. During the delay period, we encourage applicants to evaluate alternatives, including adaptive reuse, relocating the structures, and then, of course, documentation and recordation before demolition.
Thank you. Do any other commissioners have any questions or comments at this time? Seeing none, I would like to entertain a motion. The motion should cite comprehensive plan consistency and include a statement of why the request is reasonable and in the public interest. Commissioner O'Haver.
I'll move to recommend adoption of the proposed consistency statement dated January 11, 2022, containing the agenda materials to recommend approval of the zoning amendment. This recommendation also includes an amendment to the 2030 comprehensive plan to the extent described in the adopted consistency statement. After considering the policies, maps, and materials, I believe that the proposed zoning amendment is in the betterment of the community for a number of policies: LU 1.2, future land use map and zoning consistency; UD 7.3, design guidelines; DT 1.3, underutilized sites in downtown, among others.
Thank you, Commissioner O'Haver. Commissioner O'Haver has offered a motion to recommend approval of Z4121. Do we have a second? Commissioner Miller?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, I know this is a very close case for a number of reasons, the nature of the historic overlay district and the critical importance of that. And in addition, the critical needs of commercial needs for the local residents provided by one of the historical residents of this area. And I think that this, I think I know how people are going to vote, but I think this one deserves at least a split vote. So with that, I second.
Okay. Is there any additional discussion or debate on the merits of the motion? Okay. Seeing none, I will ask Shanitha for a roll call of members to record their individual votes. At the end of the roll call, I will announce the outcome of the vote. Just to repeat, this is a motion to approve Z4121 made by Commissioner O'Haver, seconded by Commissioner Miller.
Good morning and Happy New Year. Commissioner Bennett, how do you vote?
Nay.
Commissioner Dartell?
Nay.
Chair Fox?
Nay.
Commissioner Lampman?
Nay.
Commissioner Miller? Commissioner Miller?
Sorry, I was muted. Aye.
Commissioner O'Haver?
Aye.
Commissioner Raines?
Nay.
That motion fails at a vote of 5-2. Would anyone like to offer a motion to recommend denial of case Z4121 at this time? Commissioner Bennett?
Since no one else will. Let me get it up. I move to recommend adoption of the proposed consistency statement dated January 11th, 2022, contained in the agenda materials, and to recommend denial of the zoning amendment. After considering the policies, maps, and other materials included as part of the comprehensive plan, the Planning Commission determines that the proposed amendment is inconsistent with the comprehensive plan and other adopted plans, consistent with the future land use map, and the request should be denied. This action taken is reasonable and in the public interest because the request would severely weaken the protections for this historic area of Raleigh.
Commissioner Bennett has offered a motion to deny Z4121. Do we have a second? Commissioner Raines?
Second.
Right. Is there any additional discussion or debate on the merits of the motion? Seeing none, I will ask Shanitha for a roll call of members to record their individual votes. At the end of the roll call, I will announce the outcome of the vote.
Commissioner Bennett, how do you vote?
Aye.
Commissioner Dartell?
Aye.
Chair Fox?
Aye.
Commissioner Lampman?
Aye.
Commissioner Miller?
Nay.
Commissioner O'Haver?
Nay.
Commissioner Raines?
Aye.
The motion passes 5-2. Moving on to item C.2, which is case number Z5621. This is a request to rezone approximately 1.11 acres at the intersection of Smallwood Drive and Woodburn Road from commercial mixed use 5 stories urban limited to commercial mixed use 7 stories urban limited with conditions. We discussed this case at our December 14th meeting and deferred it to allow the applicant to submit additional zoning conditions related to parking deck screening. I'd like to start with an update from John Anagnost.
Good morning. So this is a site at the Village District along Smallwood Drive. It is a portion of a larger parcel. And if we can advance to the condition slide, we can take a look at those new conditions that were offered. So the first condition you see here was present the last time you saw this case, prohibiting certain uses. And then there are 3 new conditions that require certain standards for structure parking, mostly oriented towards screening out exterior surfaces of structure parking, as well as screening light sources within structure parking. And those are available in the staff report in the agenda backup materials. So unless there's a desire to have additional reminder or review of the case, I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Anagnost. We've already heard from the applicant team, so I would like to now allow for questions and comments from commissioners. Do any commissioners have any questions or comments? Commissioner O'Haver?
Yes, I think really for me, my only question was about the parking deck configuration, and I'm just curious if the applicant has anything that they can share regarding that, because I think there was some confusion, at least on my part, during the last meeting about where there was parking deck visible and not. So I'm not sure if the applicant has something to share on that.
Is the applicant available to answer questions?
Yes, Madam Chair, this is Jennifer Ashton from Longleaf Law Partners. The parking deck is going to be visible from 3 sides of the property. It will be visible along Smallwood Drive, along Woodburn, and then it will be facing interior to those other existing buildings as well. So that was one of the topics of conversation last time is, the existing buildings, what they will see. They will see a portion of the parking deck. But with the screening conditions that we've added, we believe we addressed that screening concern.
Thank you.
Just to note, I apologize. Along Cameron Street, there are existing buildings fronting Cameron, so you will not be seeing the parking deck from Cameron.
Thank you for that. Are there any additional questions or comments from commissioners? Seeing none, I would like to entertain a motion. Commissioner Rains?
Thanks, Chair Fox. I move to adopt the proposed consistency statement dated January 11th, 2022, contained in the agenda materials, and to recommend approval of the zoning amendment for case Z5621. The action taken is reasonable and in the public interest because the request would allow for additional housing supply and more opportunities for shopping, services, or employment in an urbanized area.
Thank you. And do we have a second, Commissioner O'Haver?
Second.
Commissioner Rains has offered a motion to approve Z5621. Commissioner O'Haver has offered a second. Is there any additional discussion or debate on the merits of the motion? Seeing none, I will ask Shanitha for a roll call of members to record their individual votes. At the end of the roll call, I will announce the outcome of the vote.
Commissioner Bennett, how do you vote?
Aye.
Commissioner Dautell,
Aye.
Chair Fox,
Aye.
Commissioner Lampman,
Aye.
Commissioner Miller,
Aye.
Commissioner O'Haver,
Aye.
Commissioner Rains.
Aye.
The motion passes unanimously. Moving on to new business, these requests have not appeared on a previous Planning Commission agenda, and we will hear a full staff presentation and applicant presentation for each. Item D.1 is case number Z4321. This is a request to rezone approximately 3.3 acres within the block bounded by Hargett, Salisbury, Martin, and McDowell from DX20 shopfront to DX40 shopfront. I'd like to start with a staff presentation from Jason Harden.
Good morning, commissioners. So this is a site I think most people are familiar with as the former News and Observer site. There was a site plan for a project called the Nexus that probably many of you saw a few years ago that did not move through the process, and now the request is for a rezoning. The only thing that would change is the permitted height. Let's go ahead to the next slide. So DX zoning is on the site and everywhere adjacent, shop front, also other than Nash Square, which is immediately to the west and which obviously will not have buildings. So the shop front frontage would be retained in this rezoning request, similar to the other parcels, indicating the high level of walkability that is present and desired in this area. Next slide. So an aerial of the site. It fronts on McDowell and Martin and Salisbury and at least a portion of the section along Hargett Street. So again, you can see Fayetteville Street just a block to the east and Nash Square just to the west. Next slide. Couple of views. So top left, that's that section that is adjacent to Hargett Street, and then some views from intersections of Martin and McDowell and Martin and Salisbury and Hargett and Salisbury looking toward or into the site. You can go to the next slide. So in terms of the change from existing zoning, fairly straightforward. Existing is DX20, the requested is DX40, so up to potentially 40 stories. It's a large site, obviously, most of that block, so 3 acres. And so that additional height would obviously allow many more people to live and or work on this block in the center of Raleigh. Would allow more than 1,000 additional residents in this area. Nothing else would change. Again, the only requested change is the height. So we can go to the next slide. Obviously, this is the part of the city that is the most walkable, has the highest levels of transit, has a higher walk score, bike score, transit score. Again, this is within walking distance of both Go Raleigh Station and Union Station and the future Rust Bus. So highest level of transit access clearly in the city of Raleigh, higher job proximity, obviously, than average at this location. So again, people living or working here are going to have a much lower carbon footprint than they would in places that are less walkable or less transit served. Next slide, please. So in terms of affordability analysis, obviously, this adds significantly to the housing supply. So adding to supply downtown, potentially reducing some demand in lower scale residential neighborhoods near downtown. Doesn't specifically include any subsidized units, although it's always possible that in the future it could. Obviously permits the entire range of housing types and smaller units. And again, obviously within walking distance of transit. So when calculating the housing cost and factoring in transportation, as we should, because those are crucially linked, that's going to tend to be lower here because of the option to get around without a car. Next slide, please. The future land use map is Central Business District, which translates into DX. And so you can see that's mapped on the property and adjacent properties with the exception of Nash Square. So consistent in terms of DX and consistent in terms of the height, because in the Central Business District, the recommendation is up for 40 stories. And particularly when adjacent to parks or the main streets in downtown, the recommendation is for the higher end of that height. So it's consistent with that designation. And next slide, also consistent with the urban form map, the shop front frontage, highest level of pedestrian supporting design, consistent with the designations here of downtown and core transit area. Next slide, please. So consistent policies indicate what we've already taken a look at, future land use map, several that relate to allowing more people to live and work near where we're investing in our highest levels of transit, zoning for housing, allowing more people to live in higher opportunity areas and increasing supply overall. And the last two from our downtown section of the comprehensive plan, underutilized sites, encouraging additional opportunities for people to live and work there, and high density development. So next slide, there are no inconsistent policies. It is consistent with the future land use map, urban form map, several relevant policies, and consistent, obviously, overall with the comprehensive plan. Next slide. So no outstanding issues. This is the first time that the Planning Commission has seen this. The deadline for taking action is March 12th. Happy to answer questions if there are any.
Thank you, Mr. Harden. Next, we will hear from the applicant team. The applicant and those in favor have a total of 10 minutes to speak.
Good morning. This is Mac Paul with Morningstar Law Group here on behalf of the acquisition group, owners of the two parcels. I do have a presentation. Most of it is just some images from the Nexus project, which is simply illustrative of the concept. But as you heard, the owners were pursuing a site plan for the initial building, and then the pandemic hit, they put things on pause and ultimately decided to seek some additional height for more flexibility. When we started out, we debated, whether to do a conditional use case or general use case. And I recognized y'all have not seen a lot of general use cases. When working originally on the UDO 10 years ago, the thinking was, there would be a lot more general use cases because the UDO is addressing so many aspects of the development process. But the reality is we haven't seen a lot. We decided to go with the general use case because there weren't any apparent conditions at the outset that we could identify, and felt like, we go through the process. If we heard things from either the city or the community that were imperative, we could convert. In other cases, we have converted to conditional use case. But in this situation, we went through the process. We did get a comment to do a traffic study because of the size of this particular parcel downtown at a time when the city was asking for traffic studies on DX zoning. Subsequently, now they're no longer asking for traffic studies, but we did a traffic study that was evaluated. And other than that, we went through the process and did not hear any issues that we felt required a conversion to conditions, and will allow, the shop front frontage and all of the other aspects of the UDO to control any site plan on this site. The only other thing I'd say about the height, that's the only change. You've heard us a rash of cases in the last, 6 months going to 40 stories. I think the main driver for most of those so far right now are multifamily projects. You could compare this site to Raleigh Crossings at 301 Hillsborough, which is also DX20. And the buildings there are built to 20 stories. And the buildings on this site with the original Nexus project were programmed for 20 stories, which suggests, if there was some additional height, you might see some building go beyond 20 stories. And in fact, I think there's certainly support again for multifamily, but I wouldn't anticipate all the buildings, necessarily going to that height, but that would certainly to be determined at site plan. So again, just asking for some flexibility with the height. It's consistent with all of the policies of the comprehensive plan, and we respectfully ask for your support.
Thank you. I'd like to verify with the moderator that no one else is signed up to speak on this item. Is that correct?
We have no one else in support, but we have one opposition speaker.
Okay. Those in opposition have a total of 10 minutes to speak.
And Franklin.
Good morning. Good morning. It's Anne Franklin. It's good to be with you all. I appreciate your work. I'm a neighbor of this site directly across Nash Square. And so I have a few comments. First is simply a technical one. We were not notified about the first neighborhood meeting. I don't know that the result would have been a lot different, but we are immediately across the park, and so we should have been notified about that. But let me just make a few points. Bordering on Nash Square is kind of it's a privilege. And so we take how that square is impacted by development very seriously. And so I would ask you to take a close look at when we get to, if it's in the conditions or if it just needs to be clarified, what the step backs are, STEP, step backs, so that we're not shading trees on Nash Square. Those trees are the hallmark of that park. Second, that the applicant consider some element that helps the city to meet its affordable housing goals. We have a tremendous need it should be possible for people of moderate and low income to benefit from the transit advantages and the other advantages of downtown. And I think this applicant is capable of leading the way on this. Let's get some standards in place that incorporate affordable units as we're building density. And the third is that I'm delighted that we're going to have new neighbors and have lots of new housing. But I have to remind the commission that those people come with dogs and cats, but cats don't have the same impact. This site should include some internal way of accommodating dogs need to eliminate. We simply cannot expect Nash Square to accept all of the residential waste in this particular kind. It's not something anybody likes to talk about, but nevertheless, it is possible to create such accommodations on site. And I hope that you will take the opportunity to do that. And I think those are all of my comments. I appreciate all the work that you do. Have a good morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Franklin. Are there any other speakers?
That's all we have.
Okay. Then I'd like to allow for questions and comments from commissioners. Do any members have any questions or comments? Commissioner Rains?
Question for staff, just as a reminder for me, what are the requirements for any parking screening if they face the public right of way for this type of building in this district?
So there are no specific detailed requirements for parking screening. There has been some discussion about a possible change to the code that would introduce some requirements for screening, but that has not yet gone through the process of planning commission and council review.
Thank you. I'm sure that being where it is, whatever happens, they'll do the right thing and design something appropriate for the district. But I just don't know if the commission is open to having some sort of comment or note to the council to add. I don't know how we do this with the general, but add some condition that makes sure that there's some sort of screening if there's parking decks facing the public right of way. Just throwing that out there for the commission.
Thank you, Commissioner Reeds. I did want to clarify with staff, there are no requirements for the nature of a parking deck in the shop front frontage?
That's not quite correct. In an urban frontage, the ground story has to have active uses, and the upper stories, when they're located at the perimeter of the building, must be screened so cars are not visible from adjacent streets, and you cannot have slope ramps being discernible around the perimeter. Also, architectural and vegetative screens must be used to articulate the facade and hide parked vehicles and shield lighting. So there are basic standards in the code for this.
Okay, thank you for that.
In the urban frontage, they do not apply outside of the urban frontage.
Thank you. Are there any additional questions or comments? Commissioner Miller?
The speaker had a comment about the notice requirements that went out this, and so that they weren't notified. Can staff clarify the notice requirements for this application?
So the notice requirements are for the first neighborhood meeting, 500 feet, and for this particular meeting, I believe that the property that we heard from the commenter is just outside that radius from the site. So I think that the second neighborhood meeting does have a wider radius that I believe would have incorporated that, but I believe that may be the reason there wasn't notice received for that first meeting.
Thank you. And one additional follow-up, given that increased residential density downtown and the fact that this is right on the border of a large park, I think that the concern about pet waste in public parks is a valid one. I was going to see if the applicant could speak to any of the plans or ideas about managing that as well.
Is the applicant available?
Good morning. So, I did speak to Ms. Franklin, I don't know, several weeks ago, I think before the second neighborhood meeting, about plans for Nash Square. I talked to Parks and Rec, and I had conversations previously. I thought there were some, we saw the redevelopment of Moore Square with a significant public investment. Currently, I did not hear and not aware of any specific plans to redesign Nash Square. As far as specific plans for, pets, I can't speak to that in terms of, the general use case or, the zoning itself. We do know there's a need for pet facilities. We're finally starting to see some. The city has added an area there adjacent to the public deck on Dawson Street, as well as several kind of dog parks that are planned along Hillsborough Street and over toward Glenwood South. So it is a high demand. I'm involved with projects where, particularly multifamily projects, where that is a very desirable amenity for residents to have, like a pet wash and a dog run. But those are, more of a site plan issues. And I can't say I've seen like a zoning condition per se addressing it. And we didn't hear that, through the comments along the way from staff or otherwise.
Thank you, Mr. Paul. I'm wondering if I could follow up on that. If someone from staff could answer, what are the requirements for open space for development such as this?
They've recently been modified a little bit, but essentially the amenity area requirement is a 10% requirement. What's been modified is, I have to check the latest regs. I believe part of it can now be covered, so it doesn't have to be open to the sky, which was the case for amenity areas everywhere except for downtown. I'm trying to remember if we changed the amount that is can be at an upper level. Let's take a quick look. So I just want to make sure I get this correct. So 50% must be usable for things required outdoor additional urban plazas. So up to 50% can be elevated. So about 5% of the site would have to be outdoor amenity area somewhere at grade. I hope that's helpful. I think that the pet waste issue is something that would be, I think, the issue is not the fact that there's a lot of pets, it's that people don't pick up their pet waste. And so if everyone picked up their pet waste, the fact that there's a lot of pets wouldn't really be causing a problem, as long as there was sufficient facilities available for the disposal of pet waste. And it would certainly be a first if the appropriate height for a building were determined based on the issue of pet waste, in my experience here at the city. But I think in terms of public space management, it's obviously incumbent upon the city as managing Nash Square Park to make sure that there's adequate facilities and baggies and other things available for responsible pet owners who wish to properly dispose of their pet waste to do so, even if they're forgetful and don't bring their own pet waste bags with them. There's not much you can do from a zoning perspective about pet owners who are irresponsible and do not pick up after their pets, other than increased enforcement. In terms of zoning conditions, I think that the type of amenity area and open space that would typically be found in a downtown development, it would be unlikely that dog owners would confine their dogs only to that space and never walk them on the public sidewalks. As soon as you walk your dog on the public sidewalk, you know, the doggy elimination is somewhat unpredictable. And so, you know, you're going to have this issue. I mean, the only thing I could possibly think of on a zoning condition realm would be some sort of waste disposal station that would be included in the development, but that seems like a fairly detailed thing to incorporate into a zoning condition. I think, you know, this is probably best handled as a public space management issue, but I'll just leave it there.
Thank you, that's helpful. Commissioner Miller?
I was just more wondering, I agree on the zoning condition, but just more wondering if there's nothing in site plan or otherwise requiring large multi-use buildings to have any kind of regular trash cans or any type of availability like that. You know, as we have a more dense downtown area, I'm curious what other cities might require in those cases. But we don't currently have that now, is that correct?
We don't have any specific requirement for those types of facilities on private property. That said, like, you know, and occasionally developments do provide them. I believe that the Land City Center Apartments up on North Wilmington Street, for example, has included pet waste stations. And I think they've done it simply because they want to encourage a clean environment for the residents of their building. But yes, we don't have any standards for that today.
Understood. Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Bennett?
Thank you, Chair Fox. The staff report mentioned something about recommending coordination to determine impacts to the implementation of the bike plan at the intersection of Martin Street and McDowell Street. Is somebody on that can maybe explain that a little bit more? Is that something that would be handled during the site plan?
Yes, ma'am. This is Jason Myers in Transportation. The traffic impact analysis that the applicant prepared made a recommendation of a mitigation to restripe the westbound approach of that intersection of Martin and McDowell. That would be heading towards Union Station on Martin Street to create an additional turn lane. That turn lane would potentially conflict with a separated bikeway or bike lanes that might be put in that location in the future. And that's the coordination that's mentioned in the staff review of the TIA. What that really means is that the reason for that comment is that the bike plan adopted by City Council in 2016 recommended that Martin Street have a separated bikeway. Potentially that would be a two-way cycle track on one side of the street or something on both sides of the street in lieu of on-street parking. That's not a project that's programmed. And given the impact of bus rapid transit in downtown and some of the other transit planning that's happening, it's a little uncertain of whether that recommendation might need to move to a different facility. And so staff has been chatting about that a lot internally, working with transit, working with NCDOT, and also trying to understand what is the need of the network and what are the other competing needs of the curbside space. So that recommendation is something that, depending on the results of that, we might put in, or we might recommend we don't actually do that mitigation, in which case there'll be additional delay there because we expect to need that space for a bikeway in the future. Does that answer the question?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you for that question. Are there any additional questions or comments from commissioners? Seeing no other questions, I'd like to entertain a motion. Commissioner Miller?
Thank you. I move to recommend approval of case Z4321 and to adopt the proposed consistency statement dated January 1, 2022 contained in the agenda materials.
Thank you. And Commissioner Rains, did I see a second?
Second.
Thank you. Commissioner Miller has offered a motion to approve Z4321. Commissioner Reins has seconded that motion. Is there any additional discussion or debate on the merits of the motion? Seeing none, I will ask Shanitha for a roll call of members to record their individual votes. At the end of the roll call, I will announce the outcome of the vote.
Commissioner Bennett, how do you vote?
Aye.
Commissioner Dautell?
Aye.
Chair Fox?
Aye.
Commissioner Lampman?
Aye.
Commissioner Miller?
Aye.
Commissioner O'Haver?
Aye.
And Commissioner Reins?
Aye.
The motion passes unanimously. Moving on, item D.2 was deferred to a committee meeting. So item D.3 is case number Z5921. This is a request to rezone approximately 1.09 acres from residential 4 to residential 6 along Wade Avenue. Conditions limit residential development to 8 units per acre, require a 100-foot building setback to the north, and regulate tree disturbing activity in that 100-foot setback area. I'd like to start with a staff presentation.
Good morning, Chair Fox and members of the Planning Commission. I'll go right on to the next slide, noting that your deadline is, let's see, sorry, if you go back in February 12th, next month. So zoning in the area is predominantly residential. You can see R4 and R6 districts taking up most of the map here. There's RX3 district to the south and R10's east and west on Wade. Next slide. So the existing development pattern in the area is all low scale residential uses. You'll also see JC Park southeast of the site. It's a 25-acre park with a community center, hiking trails, tennis courts, and ball fields. Next slide. This is the site. It is currently developed with a single detached house fronting on Wade Avenue. Next slide. There are 3 proposed zoning conditions. The first requires a 100-foot building setback to the properties to the north. That would be the rear property line of the lot. The second condition limits tree disturbing activities within that 100-foot area. And the third condition limits development to 8 units per acre. Next slide. This is a comparison of existing versus proposed zoning. Residential entitlement goes from 4 units to 8 units here. That condition limits development to 8 units per acre. 1 acre is 8 units. The front setback goes down by 10 feet. And the rear setback is increased by 70 feet due to the proposed zoning conditions. Next slide. So the subject site has a slightly higher bike, walk, and transit score than the city average. The transportation cost indexed is high, which means that transportation costs are low, and the job proximity index is high. These attributes together suggest that occupants of the property are more likely to walk, bike, or take transit compared to other areas of the city with lower scores, more suburban areas. In addition to the walk, bike, and transit scores, transportation costs are low because the site has close and convenient access to other services and amenities in the community. When people live close to the places they need to go, they spend less time and money traveling to those places. For drivers, this means spending less money on gas and less maintenance on vehicles, which reduces overall transportation costs for those households. The job proximity index is high, which means there are a lot of jobs nearby. So overall, people in the area are more likely to walk, bike, or take transit from this location compared to more suburban areas. And these trips will take them to a wide range of job opportunities, and it will cost them less time and money to get there. So more walking, biking, and transit use will reduce per capita carbon emissions, helping to reach our climate goals and to slow the rate of climate change. Also, driving shorter trips which people are more likely to do in this location because of its proximity to jobs and amenities, also means less carbon emissions because shorter driving trips require less fuel. So pairing these attributes with housing types that are relatively less expensive than large lot detached housing helps increase access to high amenity, high opportunity areas for families with comparatively lower incomes. Next slide. So here's a look at the transit map of the area. Route 4 is about a half a mile away, roughly a 10-minute walk. That's the pink route on the left side of the map. And Route 16 is about a mile away, so a 17-minute walk based on the sidewalk pattern. Route 16 is planned for increased frequency to a 15-minute service in the Wake County Transit Plan. It's part of the frequent network. So not great access, but there are 2 transit routes here within relative walking distance. Next slide. So the rezoning request will increase the permitted number of residential units from 4 to 8. Rezoning to R6 will also allow the townhouse building type. Under this building type, lot sizes can be and are likely to be smaller than the citywide average. And the site is, of course, within walking distance of those transit routes. A development on the site of 8 townhouses will also have other characteristics that will make these units relatively less expensive to the detached single-family housing alternative, which is the predominant building style in the city. So townhouse lots that are substantially smaller than detached housing lots and smaller pieces of property are less expensive than larger pieces of property. Shared wall construction also provides better insulation. So townhouses often, or will by definition, share walls. That improves insulation and reduces energy costs and reduces greenhouse gas emissions for that same reason. And so pairing these relatively less expensive housing costs and low costs for transportation in high access areas, high opportunity areas with jobs, makes living here less expensive. Next slide. So a few noteworthy items regarding demographics and land use history in the area. So about 17% of the census tract where the subject site is African American, and Raleigh's population is about 46% Black, so about a third the rate of the citywide population here. There are also several instances of restrictive covenants for subdivisions in the immediate area. So the covenants require large minimum lot sizes, single family occupancy, and set minimum sales prices when they were developed in the 40s. And so these covenants were intended to make living in the area more expensive, which excluded low income families. And because race is a primary indicator of income, covenants like these disproportionately excluded people of color from residency and ownership to these high opportunity areas. And considering the area is only 17% African American today, this legacy is still impacting demographics and access to the community. I think there's good evidence for that. So also, rental rates in the area rose at 10 points higher compared to the citywide average over the last 10 years. So I think the citywide average was 20%, and rents in this area were 30. And so this is also an indicator of other residential real estate transactions in the area, meaning properties for sale likely grew at a higher rate compared to the city as well. Next slide. The request is consistent with the low-scale residential future land use designation, which encourages a range of housing types, including duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, and townhomes. Next slide. The request is consistent with a number of, actually go back, or sorry, next slide. 2 more, there you go. So the request is consistent with these policies. The request will allow a more compact development type, permit townhouses, which will increase housing variety. So high opportunity and high amenity communities like the one where the rezoning is located that have a variety of housing types, including townhouse developments and apartment housing, help improve access to opportunities for people with relatively moderate and lower incomes because these housing types are less expensive than detached housing, which is the predominant building mode in the city. And I'll also note this slide and the staff report identifies land use policy 8.15 zoning for housing opportunities and choice, and urban design 5.9 successful residential neighborhoods as key policies. They're not key policies, so I wanted to point that out as a clerical error here. That being said, those two policies, in my mind, are among some of the most equitable land use policies that we have in the comprehensive plan today. They encourage improving access to high opportunity areas and all residential areas by increasing the diversity and type of building and housing types that are, again, comparatively less affordable than the detached housing alternative, which is the predominant mode in the city. Next slide. Yeah, so no outstanding issues. Your deadline is February 12th. There are PC meetings on January 25th and February 8th before that deadline for you to discuss the case. With that, I'm happy to take any questions.
There you go. My mute just went on. Next, I'd like to hear from the applicant team. The applicant and those in support have a total of 10 minutes to speak.
Good morning, Chair Fox and members of the Planning Commission, and Happy New Year. This is Toby Coleman, 150 Fayetteville Street. I am attorney with Smith Anderson, and I'm here on behalf of the owner and applicant, Raleigh Custom Homes. With me today, if needed, is Raleigh Custom Homes owner, Tim Thompson. Matt outlined the rezoning request fairly well, so I'm going to try to keep my comments as brief as possible. You can go to the next slide. Here's just a quickie summary overview of sort of what the rezoning is. It is, as Matt sort of indicated, and I think the staff report indicated, this is a rezoning to permit townhomes under the current R4 zoning. The townhome building type is not allowed. You can do a duplex, but you can't do more than that. So the request is to R6 is so that townhomes can be built on the site. We did put a zoning condition in to cap the maximum number of units at eight units. As Matt outlined, R6 is consistent with the future land use map designation of the property and consistent with a lot of the zoning designations of the surrounding area. We offered up the 100-foot rear setback and associated sort of tree protection zone to address some concerns we heard from the folks on Wells Avenue, who are the neighbors to the north. If you go to the next slide. So Wells Avenue is a neighborhood immediately to the north of this property. It's actually, I think, as I recall, a dead end street, but I may be saying that wrong. We heard from some neighbors who were concerned about development encroaching effectively on their backyards. And so to address that concern, we are offering up a 100-foot rear setback, which is, as Matt said, 70 feet more than the current required setback, as well as about 5 times the required setback under R6. And associated with that, we heard some concerns about wanting to preserve the treed area and the privacy area on this property that the folks on Wells Avenue have enjoyed. And so, out of their, to address their concern, and also, frankly, because a lot of that area is topographically challenged, we have offered up a condition that provides that no tree disturbing area will occur in the 100-foot rear setback area, except as permitted by the city. Finally, I will just note, there's no getting around it. This property is on Wade Avenue, and all of us have driven Wade Avenue. So there's always a question of traffic on people's minds whenever you talk about property on Wade Avenue. I'll just note, not sure if you got to the back of the staff report, but the city did a traffic analysis. A TIA was not required here. But the city's traffic analysis of this rezoning concluded that the rezoning would increase traffic by less than 1 vehicle trip per hour. So this was not a major traffic driver. And with that, we are available for questions. We do have a slide just to, if you wanted to see what potentially townhomes could look like, there it is. That's just really just a conceptual plan. That is just a photograph. I would expect that you would see, we would be required to do a lot more. This is not a specific site rendering. This was something taken off of MLS. So you would see something much more with a lot more, likely a lot more, what's the word I'm looking for? A lot more streetscaping, a lot more landscaping up front, and other things you would likely see. So with that, we are available for questions.
Thank you. Next, I'd like to shift to members of the public signed up to speak on this request. Those in opposition have a total of 10 minutes to speak.
Thanks.
Josh Herdman, go ahead.
Yep. Hello, everyone. Apologize, my camera, I was on a Teams meeting and I guess it didn't switch over. So yeah, I was at the first meeting we had at the JC Park, and there was some discussion just initially about bringing affordability to the area. These residences are not affordable. I would just like to say that they do not offer opportunities to moderate and lower income families. The median price was going to be 750 plus, as stated by the owner of Raleigh Homes, so that is incorrect in my opinion. The transportation and energy analysis slide, which we just saw, I'm sorry, but that's incorrect too. These occupants are not going to walk or bike down Wade Avenue just to get to another place to find a bus line a half mile away. I digress. I won't comment on what I just saw. But yeah, there is a lot of concern on our street with cutting those trees down that offer some sort of respite for us who live on the backside, my house being immediately adjacent, the Stanleys next door, the Lynns. So there's a total of 4 houses that are immediately adjacent, and those trees do offer a visual as well as a auditory barrier from Wade Avenue. There's also a stream that runs through there that connects the two southeast prongs of the Beaver Dam Creek. So I'm not sure any of that 100-foot would matter when there's potentially a riparian buffer. That is a corridor for a lot of animals that traverse up through there: deer, owls, salamanders, snakes. And this is just another example of someone trying to move the goalpost to put more homes in an area that was not originally designed to house this many families. And when you do that, some things to consider is the maximum amount of impervious surface allowed to these areas. Moving from R4 to R6 would increase about 13% from 38 to 51. Which causes a lot of localized flooding, runoff, which just adds to erosion. And I personally have been in my house for 5 years. And at the end of our street on Canterbury and Wells, they put in 2 homes. They've done a couple more in the area. But I mean, in the last year since they put those in, I can see a huge amount of runoff that just comes through my yard and is now, traversing through my yard and eroding it. We're going in the wrong direction when we start slapping these houses in and increasing the density just because. This neighborhood can't sustain itself when you do that. There's already giant housing communities that are going in around the corner on Grant Avenue and Baez Street. That's a very large community, and across the street on Gardner and Wade Avenue, they're going to have to put barriers in to allow turnoffs, and it's disrupting. There's no plans to widen Wade Avenue or to add sidewalks on the northern side of Wade along that area to provide walking access. So where do all these people park? Where do their friends park? These are questions that I feel like should be answered prior to changing the zoning. And I apologize, I'm not very familiar with this process. This is my first planning commission meeting. So my ignorance may show, but I just feel like changing the amount of homes you can put in here first and then figuring it out later is irresponsible, in my opinion. And another thing is once you do this, there are a lot of properties along Wade that 40 years ago, 30 years ago, there wasn't that much traffic and it wasn't very hard to get out. I don't know what the saleability of those homes are, but potentially after you put this and the other places in, a lot of those folks are elderly and may want to get out and retire to a less congested area. So this is just really opening up the opportunity for more people to come in and change this whole strip to R6. And I just feel like, increasing, sorry, I lost track here. Increasing the inventory of housing by rezoning the area is just not the right way to do it. This is a residential neighborhood. There are families. It is a dead-end street, per your comment earlier, or question earlier. And we all didn't buy these houses just to be invaded by smaller, quote unquote, more affordable homes. And I realize this potentially could raise everyone's values, home values, which was brought up in the initial meetings. None of us care about that. We're not going anywhere. This is our forever homes, personally. Original discussion was also for 6 homes, and now I'm seeing they're talking about 8 homes. I'm not sure how that changed. But basically, we're just kind of everyone at Wells Avenue is not understanding why there's not more research done to figure out what's going on with this creek. How is this going to increase runoff? How is this going to affect the neighboring areas? It seems just, again, I understand that this is a process that I may be ignorant to, but zoning ordinance are in place to limit density, not really enhance it. And I mean, that's why those protections are here. And it seems like this is the opposite of this discussion is just the opposite, kind of increasing homes because someone says, oh, well, this allows for it, so let's do it. And I get it, the more homes this man builds, the more money he can make, and that's fine. I understand that's the world we live in. But at the end of the day, it affects, my family, my neighbors' families, and it's happening around us at a rate that is not going to be easily turned back. And we're all kind of concerned on what's going to happen when or if this gets rezoned. And I realize that this is not our decision, but there's a lot of factors that are involved, which I feel like just, on paper, everyone can say, yeah, it falls in line with this, and that this is the demographic from 70 years ago. So I'm going to put this slide up and tell everyone about how this neighborhood came to be. Well, things are very different, as everyone knows, from what happened in the 40s when these houses were built. But anyway, yeah, that's. I sent in a letter, email. I think Nicole had read it, kind of outlining what I had to say, which is pretty much everything I just said. So I appreciate your time.
Thank you, sir. Also, thank you for your email. I'm sure we all had the opportunity to read that as well. Are there any moderator?
Yeah, you're back. There's no more speakers.
Thank you. Okay, so now I'd like to allow for questions and comments from the commissioners. I'm going to kick that off asking a question of staff. If you could walk through what the requirement is at site plan related to the creek or stormwater runoff, etc. And then an unrelated question that I'll just put out as well. The current zoning, can someone clarify if the current zoning would allow a cottage court development now?
Thanks, Chair Fox. We'll start with the first question first. I believe Ben Brown is on the call. Ben, could you answer the stormwater questions the chair had?
Yep. Hey, this is Ben Brown. So if they come in, because they mentioned townhomes, if they come in for a subdivision, they are over an acre. So that means they would be subject to our full stormwater rules and not the impervious maximum that the adjacent resident mentioned. Now, if they don't come in for subdivision and leave that lot the way it is, then he's right. They would be subject to the impervious maximum deemed for whatever zoning district they were in. But if they do subdivide for those townhomes, then they will have to treat for nitrogen and for the rate of runoff for the 2 and 10-year storm. And for the creek that's in the middle of the property, the state would have to weigh on this to be sure, but this could have a 50-foot riparian buffer on each side of it. So that could be where the applicant got the 100 feet kind of number from to kind of put that in there. But until the state claims it's a riparian buffer, which we would verify at site plan, that's unsure now if there's a state riparian buffer on it or if the 100 feet is just additional beyond what is regulated.
Thank you, Mr. Brown.
And thank you, Chair Fox. And to answer your question regarding the cottage court development option, I'm looking at the ordinance now, which says in R4, a cottage court can be constructed. The minimum net site area is 29,000 square feet. The subject site is about 47,000 square feet. And so the net site area per dwelling is 7,200, so 47,480 by 7,260. Yeah, it's about it looks like a 6-unit cottage court complex could be built if all the other site requirements were met without doing a deeper analysis. I think my high level would be yes. A cottage court could be built on this site. Now, how many units it would yield would take a little more review.
Thank you, that's helpful. Do any other commissioners have any questions or comments? Commissioner Bennett?
Thank you. I think another concern that I read about was increased traffic and on-street parking within the neighborhood, I guess along Wells Avenue, and that being a potential safety issue for people out walking or biking. Does transportation staff have any comment on, I guess, parking? Would people be parking along Wells Avenue?
This is Jason Myers from Transportation. Can you hear me? I switched to a headset since the last time I spoke.
Yes, I can.
Thank you. I don't know that that's a question that I can answer clearly. Now, if there is not parking sufficient for the demand within some kind of internal circulation system of this parcel, assuming they develop with a private access way to townhouses within just this one parcel, you know, that it's a self-contained project. The potential places where somebody could on-street park are, the closest would be a Canterbury on either side of Wade Avenue, and then passing by maybe 100 and measure on, I think 400 feet of Canterbury, about 425 feet of Canterbury is Wells. So if parking were prohibited on Canterbury, then people would certainly be looking to Wells, I think. Or if it was filled up, which is maybe harder to imagine, but that might be a question for the applicant as well, as how do they intend to, you know, provide for parking within the development, or what they expect their customers to do in the area.
Thanks, Jason. Can
Is
I
the
ask the
applicant
applicant?
available?
Thank
Yeah.
you.
And I'm sorry, before the applicant, this is Matt. If I may also just say one thing about site access and potential overflow parking to the surrounding street network. I'm looking at the map now, and it appears that there is sufficient sidewalk access along Canterbury. Let me see. Or along Wade Avenue that would bring people down. I don't see that there is sidewalk access on Canterbury or Wells. So people walking there would have to walk in the street.
Commissioner Bennett, good morning. This is Toby Coleman. Just to respond to your question, I think based on, you know, what we heard, I'll just say this. So parking is allowed on both sides of Canterbury. The plan, so that's question number one. That was probably your third question. In terms of on-site parking, the expectation obviously is that there will be sufficient on-site parking for residents. Obviously, site planning will determine, you know, whether there are guest spots, things like that. So that's a little bit harder to determine sort of at the front end of this. But certainly, you know, if you look at the current site and you look at other developments there on Wade Avenue, certainly you would expect that this would have some additional parking, but maybe not a ton of additional parking. To the extent that there are visitors who need to find parking, as Mr. Myers indicated, there's 400 feet of linear length of Canterbury before you get to Wells. And the comments we heard at the neighborhood meeting were that people tend to park on Canterbury. In terms of whether there are concerns about parking on Wells, we didn't hear any of those. Certainly, we understand that neighbors may have some concerns about that, but given the, you know, extensive, the sort of circumvention that you would have to go through to get to Wells, seems unlikely.
Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Rains, I saw your hand.
Just a quick observation on this comment about parking on adjacent streets. Just note that there is no sidewalk on the north side of Wade Avenue. So even if people were to park on adjacent streets, they would have to walk through private yards or cross the street to the south side to get anywhere. So just making a note of that.
Thank you. Are there any additional questions or comments from commissioners? Seeing none, I'd like to entertain a motion or a recommendation for additional consideration. Commissioner Dattel?
Thanks, Chair Fox. I move to recommend adoption of the proposed consistency statement dated January 11th, 2022, contained in the agenda materials, and to recommend approval of the zoning amendment. The action taken is reasonable in the public interest because it's consistent with the comprehensive plan, and the future land use map also permits a wider variety of housing types and potentially income ranges of people that may live there. The existing zoning which requires larger lot detached housing, would likely result in housing types that are relatively more expensive and therefore less attainable to households with lower incomes.
Thank you, Commissioner Dattel. Do we have a second? Commissioner O'Haver?
Second.
Thank you. Commissioner Dattel has offered a motion to approve Z5921. Commissioner O'Haver has offered a second. Is there any additional discussion or debate on the merits of the motion? Seeing none, I will ask Shanitha for a roll call of members to record their individual votes. At the end of the roll call, I will announce the outcome of the vote.
Commissioner Bennett, how do you vote?
Aye.
Commissioner Dattel?
Aye.
Chair Fox?
Aye.
Commissioner Lampman?
Commissioner Lampman had to drop off.
Thank you. Commissioner Miller?
Aye.
Commissioner O'Haver?
Aye.
Commissioner Rains?
Aye.
The motion passes 6-0. Moving on to item D.4, which is case number Z6121. This is a request to rezone approximately 1.05 acres on West Edenton Street from downtown mixed-use 20 stories urban general to downtown mixed-use 40 stories urban general conditional use. I'd like to start with a staff presentation by JP Mansell.
Good morning. Sorry, doing double duty today. So I won't repeat the information you offered, Chair Fox, but just want to note that the Planning Commission deadline is March 12th. Zoning in the area is primarily DX or completely DX, ranging from 5 to 20 stories, and there are also some predominantly urban general and shop front frontages in the area. Here's a shot of the site. So to the north is the Quorum Center, which is a mixed-use residential office building. To the west is the St. Paul Church. On the block to the east is the Edenton Street Church, and just to the south is the Holiday Inn. A couple of street views of the site. So currently a 3-story office building called the Reynolds Building is currently located on the site. And so the first shot is looking south on North Harrington Street, second west on Edenton Street. So this is a summary of conditions. So the first condition prohibits uses otherwise allowed in the DX district. Conditions 2 and 3 specify some minimum requirements for structured parking facades and also structured parking lighting, which you've seen on a couple of previous cases, similar conditions. Condition 4 requires the installation of a bike share station on the site and an indoor bike storage room for any development greater than 300,000 square feet. And condition 5 prohibits the nightclub use as defined in that condition. So this is looking at the increase in entitlement with the request. So residential density would increase, increase in office, and small increase in retail square footage. Being downtown, the transportation and energy analysis shows, higher walk score, bike score, transit score, lower transportation costs than other parts of the city, being that, there are destinations that are walkable to the site or that you can get to using transit and not a personal vehicle, and also higher job proximity than the average being downtown, with downtown being a job center. There are multiple transit lines that stop directly at the site. So routes 16, 6, and 4 and also Route 100, that's a Go Triangle route, all stop directly in front of the site. And these are all 30-minute frequencies at peak periods, and I think a couple of them might be actually more 30 minutes throughout at a broader range throughout the day. So the request would add to the housing supply, permit variety of housing types, and allow smaller units and lots than the citywide average, all within walking distance of transit, so current transit, and also future transit at Raleigh Union Station and the Go Raleigh station. So the site is included in the original Christmas plan. Black residents at the time virtually had no rights. It's near the citywide average in pretty much any demographic indicator, and median rent has increased at a higher rate than the citywide average, and those detailed figures are in the staff report. The request is consistent with the central business district future land use designation. It's also consistent, or the frontage is consistent with the urban form map. It's a urban general frontage. The urban form map recommends an urban frontage in the downtown area, and also within a core transit area. Overall, the request is consistent with the comprehensive plan, as you saw, consistent with the future land use map and the urban form map. Here's a list of consistent policies. So increasing intensity and density within walking distance of transit and transit station areas, reducing greenhouse gases by allowing more development in areas where people can walk and take transit to destinations, increasing potential housing supply, and then some urban design policies that having a frontage would be consistent with. There's one inconsistent policy. So based on Parks comments, this is an area that could use some additional public realm amenities. So just citing that one inconsistent policy. Deadline for action is March 12th, and there are currently no outstanding issues. Happy to take any questions when the time comes.
Thank you. Next, I'd like to hear from the applicant team. The applicant and those in support have a total of 10 minutes to speak.
Good morning, Chair Fox and members of the Planning Commission. This is Worth Mills with Longleaf Law Partners on behalf of the property owner. I'm joined by Tyson Strutzenberg of Trinity Capital Advisors, who is available for any questions. Next slide, please. As JP mentioned, this rezoning request would retain the DX base district and the urban general frontage, but would increase the allowable height to 40 stories. Our request is consistent with the future land use map, the urban form map, and the comprehensive plan overall. It's compatible with the surrounding area. We have worked with the Quorum Center residents who are adjacent to us on the north throughout this process on crafting zoning conditions, and they have been a collaborative group to work with. For all of these reasons, the request is reasonable and in the public interest, and we ask for your recommendation of approval. Next slide, please. So as JP mentioned, this is located in the northeast quadrant of the North Harrington Street and West Edenton Street intersection. It's just over an acre large. The Holiday Inn is across from us on Edenton Street, and the new 400H building, which will begin construction in fall of this year and is planned for a 20-story tower, that will be catty corner to our site across Harrington and Edenton intersection. And then the Quorum Center that I mentioned earlier is immediately north. That is a 14-story tower as well. So there is a lot of height surrounding this site already. Next slide, please. Here we have a street view of the Reynolds building and the existing streetscape. Currently a 3-story office building with narrower sidewalks than you might see in downtown otherwise. Next slide. So again, the property is zoned downtown mixed use, 20 stories with the urban general frontage today. The surrounding property is also zoned DX with heights varying from 5 to 20 stories. Next slide. Again, the property and the surrounding properties are designated for the central business district. The DX zoning district is the district that most corresponds with that future land use map designation. And as JP mentioned, we are consistent with the future land use map guidance. Next slide, please. So the slide on the left is a zoomed in photo of the property in the urban form map. The slide or the photo on the right is that same urban form map zoomed out, so you can see where in relation this is to the downtown core area. It's very centrally located. It is within close proximity to Raleigh Union Station, planned commuter rail, and has access to a number of bus routes throughout the city that run on high intervals. So we are increasing the housing and office opportunities within this core transit area and are thus consistent with the urban form map as well. Next slide, please. So this is the height table as part of the comprehensive plan. You can see the matrix here as you align your future land use map designation with your urban form map designation. Highlighted here, our property is within the central business district and within the core transit area. And thus our requested height of 40 stories is within the acceptable range as recommended by the comprehensive plan. Next slide, please. And this slide here shows the urban general frontage in that build to range along both Edenton and Harrington Street. I just wanted to show this because the urban general frontage is going to pull that building closer to the intersection and away from the Quorum Center property. So solely by adding the urban general frontage, we think that we're going to be creating additional space and additional buffers between any new development here and the Quorum Center. Next slide, please. So this set of zoning conditions you see here has changed constantly during our meetings with neighbors and during staff review. At the outset, we included those use prohibitions in condition 1, the parking deck screening regulations in condition 2, and the parking deck lighting regulations in condition 3. At staff's behest, we incorporated condition 4, which requires a 6-dock bike share station for any new development over 300,000 square feet. Lastly, we prohibited the nightclub use for those Quorum residents who did not wish to see Glenwood Avenue style bars near their homes. The UDO does not define the nightclub use, but we have created a condition here that we think will keep those club style bars off the property, but will allow for that traditional bar, tavern, or lounge use that some of those residents might enjoy from time to time. And just to summarize, these conditions before you are a result of the collaboration between the applicant group, the community, and the planning staff throughout the rezoning process. Next slide, please. And again, to summarize, our request is consistent with the key comprehensive plan policies and those maps. This rezoning would facilitate new housing and office opportunities in an area primed for intense development. And for these reasons, the request is reasonable and in the public interest, and we ask for your recommendation of approval. Both myself and Tyson are available for questions, and we thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you for your presentation. I believe we have a number of speakers signed up today to speak in opposition to this one, so I'm going to go forward with our standard 2 minutes per speaker.
All right, we have three speakers signed up. The first speaker will be John Lane.
Good morning, everybody. I believe the other 2 speakers have agreed to yield their time for me so we can speak as one. Chairman Fox, is that okay with you?
Without objection from the rest of the commission, I'm going to allow you to go ahead and proceed by taking their time yielded to you.
Thank you very much. I'm John Lane. I have some prepared remarks. I did send a picture in, and we're all very new to this, so you'll forgive us. We don't have a formal presentation and a team of lawyers supporting us. We have just some residential folks. So could that picture come up? And I don't know if you can exactly, do the other one, please. So this is a view from the Quorum Center, and I just so we can get out of the view of grids and squares in different colors. This is a living, breathing street, and you'll see today that this little 2-lane street is filled with dump trucks for the Hillsborough Street. When the dump trucks go away, they will be replaced by cement trucks, and those are expected to last for probably 2 years to build this building. And if you approve this application, we can expect most likely something similar for the next 3 to 4 years. So as I give my remarks, please keep your eyes on Little Harrington Street. You can take the picture down. Thank you. So I have some prepared remarks that I'm going to read. Please remember that we're new to this, so thank you for the opportunity to talk about the rezoning project 76121 located at 316 West Edenton Street in downtown Raleigh. I'll refer to this as the proposed development going forward. Before I begin, I'd like to thank representatives from Longleaf Partners, Trinity Capital, and the Planning Commission for being available to us above and beyond their legal requirements. I'm John Lane. I thank those who have yielded their time to me and to the chair for allowing us to do so. I'm the president of the residential board of the Quorum Center located in the lot north adjacent to the proposed development. I represent not just the Quorum Center residents, but our larger community, including the congregations of the Edenton Street United Methodist Church and the St. Paul AME. Today, I'm here to state our united opposition to the proposed development. Our community submitted a formal opposition letter, and I asked the Planning Commission to read that document carefully as they consider this application. I'm just going to pause my prepared remarks for a second and just simply say that we have a very different definition of the word consistent, because in our view and in our letter, you'll see that we believe that this development is inconsistent with at least 10 of the points and a bunch of objectives that I'll name. I'll also just say as an aside that this 40-story tower is on a lot that is 1/3 the size of the one that came up earlier. So just please picture in your minds what that would look like as you think about the neighborhood. Before I summarize our opposition, let me tell you what we do support. We are not NIMBYs. We support growth in population, tax base, and quality of life in Raleigh. We support well-planned and considerate urban density and best-in-class public transportation. In sum, we support the 2030 comprehensive plan. That is why we oppose the proposed development. It does not meet the stated policies of that plan and should be rejected. The proposed development is inconsistent with at least 10 policies of the CP. Moreover, it works against the stated several objectives of the CP, which I'll enumerate shortly. As such, it should not be approved. First, let's talk about inconsistency with stated policies. The 2030 CP allows for buildings within a range of 3 to 40 stories within the CBD. However, what is appropriate within that range depends on many factors. Since the adoption of the William Christmas Plan in 1792, Raleigh has planned for its most prominent buildings to be constructed on axial streets or in one of its squares. Criteria added later allow for a location on 4-lane streets and in close proximity to a train station. Anyone who is familiar with or simply visits the neighborhood can immediately see the proposed development does not meet this simple criteria. It is not located on a major street. West Edenton has 3 lanes and North Harrington has just 2. Note that the cosmetic changes offered by the developer to expand Edenton to 4 lanes for a portion of the block, even if technically and legally feasible, would make little difference. Even now, at the start and end of the business day, the traffic in the area is substantial. Traffic on McDowell and Dawson Streets often crawls from light to light, and Edenton and Hillsborough are not much better. Cross-traffic backups and clogged intersections are a regular occurrence. Traffic to and from the Pendle Building and 400 Hillsborough will certainly worsen the situation. Raleigh has made significant and correct forward-looking investments in both pedestrian and bicycle access safety. These investments would be significantly hindered by the proposed development. Clearly, the traffic and public transportation burden alone makes the proposed development a non-starter. Proximity to a transit hub has been mentioned as a supporting criteria. Urban Union Station is half a mile away and services Amtrak trains, an unlikely commuter transit source. The bus terminal is more than 3/4 of a mile away, hardly close proximity. But more important than proximity is traffic flow along existing routes. When the Pendo and 400 Hillsborough buildings are completed and in use, the expected vehicle traffic volume would certainly add to the congestion on the surrounding streets. This alone would hinder smooth bus movement along the current corridors. Adding in the volume from the proposed development anywhere near the requested height would greatly exacerbate that situation. Of course, if proximity to transit centers was the major consideration for rezoning approval, practically every lot in the CBD would qualify. For the inconsistencies with stated policies, the proposed development applications should be rejected. Now let's talk about those stated objectives. To begin, I will ask that the Planning Commission refer to pages 3-16 of the CP. That section provides straightforward objectives in regard to infrastructure capacity, community character, protection of open space, and the prevailing density of lot size in the surrounding area. The low-rise developments along P Street between Harrington and West Streets have already added to the infrastructure burden. Large delivery trucks on Harrington are now a regular occurrence, significantly changing the character of the neighborhood as well as straining the infrastructure. Add in the Pendo and 400 Hillsborough buildings and the neighborhood infrastructure will be under even more strain. Train crossings. Train crossing delays on both Harrington Street and the intersection of Jones and West Street must be considered when assessing infrastructure impact. The proposed development will put additional traffic on the 2-lane Harrington Street, which can be expected to back up significantly during train crossings, causing regular snarls on Harrington, Edenton, and Hillsborough. For traffic flow and public safety reasons, the proposed development should be rejected. This community is located within the CBD, is characterized by low-rise residential, very light office, small business, small warehouses, and the 2 prominent churches. The proposed development simply does not fit. The nearby AME church is a designated Raleigh historic site. Their leadership fears that construction at 400 Hillsborough and the proposed development could have a negative structural impact on this valued historical building. Many high-growth cities have seen the unintended consequences of development that does not fit the character of an area. Raleigh would be wise to heed those learned lessons. I'll quickly add that the proposed development would, on top of everything else, significantly reduce the area's current open space long enjoyed by the neighborhood. Moreover, there are other CBD neighborhoods that are appropriate for high-density development. This neighborhood is simply not one of them. In conclusion, the proposed development is deeply inconsistent with the policies set out in the CP. Policies which are established with the clear purpose of guiding the city's decision-making process. The proposed development is not on an axial street, a major street, or square. The infrastructure capacity will be greatly burdened and neighborhood characteristics transformed beyond recognition. Granting this application would contribute negatively to Raleigh's otherwise orderly, carefully planned effort to create a vibrant downtown that is equally accessible and enjoyable for all. For all of these reasons, the rezoning applicant should be denied. Humbly submitted, John Lane, President, Quorum of the Quorum Center Residential Board. Thank you for the prepared remarks. I will yield my time to anyone who else wishes to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Lane. I just want to make sure there are no more speakers signed up to speak.
We had the 2 other speakers. I can unmute them to confirm that they agreed to yield.
Okay, let's go ahead and do that.
They did not speak up that they did not.
Okay.
Angela Brady.
Yeah, confirmed. I yielded to John.
All right, thank you. And then Ken Wooten.
Yes, I yielded to John. Thank you.
Great,
Okay,
thank you.
So now I'd like to allow for questions and comments from commissioners. Do any commissioners have any questions or comments? Commissioner Rains?
Thanks, Chair Fox. On the staff report, there was a note about public amenity space. I'd like to ask the applicant if they can consider dedicating a portion of this project to public amenity space as part of a added condition.
Is the applicant available?
Yes, thanks, Commissioner Rains. We have discussed inclusion of space for public art, which falls under that public amenities realm and is contemplated by that comprehensive plan policy. We would be willing to include a condition that reserves some space, and we can work with staff on exactly the correct wording of that condition and maybe where in relation to the street or the intersection that might be. But we are willing to, work with staff to create a new condition that addresses some public art on the site.
Great. Thank you, Worth.
Thank you. And Commissioner Bennett, I saw your hand as well.
Thank you, Chair Fox. I was going to ask about the two churches that I think had also expressed concern about the proposed rezoning. Worth, did your team do any type of specific coordination with those churches? And if so, was anything changed or done to address their specific concerns?
Yes, thank you, Commissioner Bennett. I've left the church and Reverend Hughes emails and voicemails over the last, I'd say, 2.5 months, but I haven't heard from anybody at the church to date. We're certainly willing to speak with them and try to figure out ways that we can address their concerns. But I have not had a chance to speak with them yet.
Okay, and that's both church. There were two churches.
So
you have
I reached out to the Methodist Church across Harrington Street, directly across from us.
Okay. So that's the Edenton Street?
And Edenton Street is on the other side of Dawson Street.
Okay.
So we're separated by a major thoroughfare. Again, I'm happy to speak with them, but our main focus was on the St. Paul's Episcopal Church across North Harrington Street.
Okay. So I'm sorry, a chat popped up. I'm trying to understand what the specific concerns were. So if someone else that knows the specific concerns of the churches, I guess there are two. I know they had signed on with the Quorum Center residential group, but I'm just trying to understand how their concerns, if their concerns are being addressed, or if they're just outright opposed to the rezoning. Is there something that can be done to make it more amenable to them other than just flat out denying it?
Hi, Commissioner Bennett. This is JP. I haven't heard any specific feedback from either of the two churches, other than just the mentioning of their opposition by the speaker, Mr. Lane, today.
Okay. Chair Fox, we're being chatted. I don't know if you want to address, or I don't know if it's coming directly to me. Mr. Lane is saying they did speak to the pastors and Ken can speak to that. I know they've already taken their 10 minutes. I don't know if we want to hear if he needs Ken, our Ken, or if they have a Ken on the line. But I'll punt that to you and let you handle that.
If the speaker would like to unmute and if they're able to answer the question about the church's opposition.
Yes, my neighbor Ken, if Ken Wooten, who was signed up as a speaker, he actually took the time and went over to the churches and they were easily accessible to speak with. So maybe you can unmute me and unmute Ken for a second.
Okay, let's go ahead and unmute Ken.
Thank you, Chair Fox. This is Ken Wooten. I have spoken to Reverend Hodges on more than one occasion and met with him personally last week when he signed the letter of opposition. He is outright opposed. He's concerned about the increased density and congestion in the historic church being in the shadow of this 40-story development and the one across the street, directly across Edenton Street from his church, the 400H. And he's also concerned about structural integrity from the construction process of the church, of Edenton Street. So for those reasons, he signed on to the letter of opposition and is just completely opposed to the development. He's out of town this week and was not able to attend today.
Thank you for providing that information. I'd like to ask a question of the applicant. If you'd like additional time to work on a condition related to public amenity space, would that also offer you the opportunity to do a little bit of additional coordination with the two churches?
It would, and we welcome it.
Okay. Right, excellent. Unless there are other questions from commissioners, it sounds like we are going to defer this case to allow the applicant to work on additional conditions for public amenity space and to have some more conversations with the nearby churches. My guess is we need to move that not to our next meeting in January, but to our first meeting in February. Is that acceptable from a staff perspective and also from the applicant's timing?
That's fine with our group.
Yeah, and staff has no issue with that timing.
All right, without objection, we're going to defer that case, Z6121, to our first meeting in February. Moving on to item D.5, which is case number TCZ 5821. This is a request to amend the zoning conditions for a 3.2 acre portion of the Falls Ridge Plan development. I'd like to start with a staff presentation by Hannah Recco.
Good morning. As was mentioned, this is a text change to zoning conditions request on 2000 Falls Valley Drive, a portion of the Falls Ridge Plan development. Next slide. You can see the outlined portion of the PD here and then the surrounding zoning, which is primarily residential 4. Next slide. Now, this is a larger view of the context. Falls Valley Drive is off of Falls of Neuse Road, just north of I-540. Large residential areas in the surrounding area, and then along Falls of Neuse Road, a mix of commercial and office uses. Next slide. Here's a zoom in of the parcel. You can see it's at the intersection of Falls Valley Drive and Coxendale Drive. There are some personal use, non-residential uses to the west along Falls Valley Drive. And then the site is adjacent and across the street from some residential areas. Next slide. Some views of the site, one looking down Falls Valley Drive, the other on Coxendale Drive. Next slide. So there are 5 changes that are being requested. First is to create a new phase to the planned development. So it would be a phase 5 to apply the commercial mixed use district as the base district, to prohibit some of the uses that are permitted in CX. You can see the list there under number 3. And then to apply a maximum building height of 5 stories, and to apply hours of operation for non-residential uses between 6 a.m. and 11 p.m. Next slide. So the current phase of this parcel falls under in the Falls Ridge PD references an old office and institutional 1 district and permits all of the residential and accessory uses permitted in that district. So you can see that there's currently residential entitlement on the site, but not non-residential entitlement. The request would apply commercial mixed use. So that would be and would increase the building height to 5 stories. So that is increasing the residential entitlement, as you can see here, and then adding non-residential entitlement as well. Next slide. So the site has similar walk and transit score to the city as a whole, as well as an average cost of transportation, lower bike score than average, and higher proximity to jobs, likely from the surrounding non-residential office and commercial uses in the area. Next slide. The site does not have within walking distance to bus service. Next slide. As I mentioned previously, the request would add to the number of units that could be built on the site, would permit a variety of housing types, including smaller units and smaller lots than citywide average. But the site is not within walking distance of transit, and there are no guaranteed subsidized units. Next slide. And then the surrounding area demographic analysis shows fewer minorities, low-income populations, populations with less than a high school education than the city overall, and a higher proportion of population under 5 and older 65 in the surrounding area. And some historical covenants restricting development beyond the UDO were found in the surrounding area as well. Next slide. So the site is designated as office and residential mixed use on the future land use map. This designation is applied to the area that the PD currently is, and then also along Falls and Moose Road as well. This designation corresponds closest with an OX district. The request does set CX as the base district, but does prohibit many of the uses not envisioned by this designation, and applies some hours of operation that also make it align more with the office and residential mixed use designation. So as it currently is, the request is consistent with that future land use map. Next slide. There is no urban form guidance for the site, so we can go on to the next slide. Overall, the request is consistent with the comprehensive plan, as I just discussed with the future land use map. Go to the following slide, we can see some of those consistent policies, which include the conditions that address some of the commercial development impacts on the site, and the increase in housing supply that the request would allow. Next slide. There are a few inconsistent policies. The first recommends that in areas with the office and residential mixed use future land use map designation, retail should be ancillary to other uses. The conditions do specify that standalone retail is not permitted. So if retail were to locate on the site, it would need to be part of a multi-tenant building. However, there isn't any restriction on the size of that, so it could be potentially larger than this policy is envisioning. And then the second policy, building height transitions, recommends that non-residential uses that are across the street from lower and moderate scale residential uses be no more than 3 stories in height at that frontage when that road is not a major street. So this is being triggered here because Coxendale Street is not considered a major street under the city's classification, and the request would permit up to 5 stories and would limit the location of that, and would allow that on that frontage. So next slide, I believe that covers the staff presentation. The deadline for action is March 12th. You can see a few of your upcoming meetings. You have some opportunity to discuss this further if needed. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Rucko. Next, I'd like to hear from the applicant team. The applicant and those in support have a total of 10 minutes to speak.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, everyone. This is Jennifer Ashton from Longleaf Law Partners on behalf of the applicant. I'm joined today by Stephen Beatty on behalf of the property owner as well. If we could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. As Hannah mentioned, the site is 3.2 acres. It is currently vacant. We are adjacent to Falls Valley Drive and Coxendale Drive and also I-540. We are seeking to amend the Falls Ridge PD, which was adopted in 2000. The amendment pertains to 2000 Falls Valley Drive only. The rest of the PD has already been developed and will remain the same. The current PD regs for the property are governed by a master plan. It designates the parcel as phase 1. This should have been developed first, but it never did, and we'll talk more in a moment about why that didn't happen. It limits the parcel to 100 residential units, and the master plan does show a preference for those to be multifamily units. It limits the building height to 3 stories in height or 52 feet for a maximum. And as Hannah mentioned, the build out is governed by the Office and Institutional 1 district, which no longer exists under the current UDO, but still governs this parcel. Our proposal, we are seeking to reclassify the property from phase 1 to a new phase 5, have the CX district apply as the base zoning district with conditions. This will open the property up to some limited low impact non-residential uses, such as office, research and development, self-storage, personal service, and retail, although the retail has been heavily restricted. On the non-residential front, we are proposing to prohibit 15 of those non-residential uses that are considered higher impact to the surrounding neighborhoods and not consistent with that office and residential mixed use land use designation. For example, we are prohibiting standalone retail, vehicle repair, fuel sales, restaurant, bars, and hotel. Most of these uses were prohibited after feedback from the neighbors. We are asking also to increase the building height from 3 stories to 5 stories. That will increase the number of residential units that can be developed on the site from 100 units to 139 units. And it will also help create a more compact development, which is supported by the comp plan. We also are proposing a condition to limit the hours of operation for non-residential uses, including all deliveries, from 6 a.m. to 11 p.m. to reduce the impacts on those surrounding areas. This standard was taken from the non-residential hours of operation found in the RX zoning district. So why are we making this request? As I mentioned earlier, the property was designated as phase 1 over 20 years ago. It was supposed to be developed first, but that never happened, even though it has been marketed for multifamily residential development this entire time. So why didn't it develop out? Well, the number one reason we believe is because of the location. There is no visibility from Falls of News or I-540. There is also an existing sound barrier wall and a 70-foot transmission line easement running along the entire southern boundary. We also have a very odd shaped lot. It's very narrow, especially to our west, which is exacerbated by those transmission lines. Also, the master plan has some pretty restrictive caps currently. There's a 100 dwelling unit cap, and there's also a 3-story height limit cap. Taking all of that together, there is just not enough developable area or dwelling unit yield to make the project viable. So we're hoping by increasing the height to 5 stories, we'll add that extra dwelling unit yield, which could attract a developer to do a residential development. Or in the alternative, the amendment would open the property to some limited low impact non-residential uses that are compatible with the rest of the planned development. As Hannah mentioned earlier, the planned development currently contains limited retail, personal services, general office, and medical office. So if we could go on to slide 4, that would be great. Next slide. Perfect, thank you. So this is a close-up of the site. As you can see, there is that very large transmission line running through the back of the property. And as you can see to our north, there is that existing, the rest of the PD to our north and then to our west. If we could go to the next slide, please. The PD is in pink here. This is current zoning, and we are surrounded by R4 residential. Most of this residential existed prior to the PD. It actually existed prior to I-540 eastbound being constructed. If we could go to the next slide. This is the future land use map. As Hannah mentioned, we are office and residential mixed use. The 3 single-family homes to our north on Coxondale Drive are also included in that same land use designation. We are deemed consistent with the future land use map and the comp plan overall, and we also are compatible with the surrounding areas. If we could go to slide 12, which is our prohibited use list. Thank you. Again, we are prohibiting 15 non-residential uses. These are considered the more high impact uses that could, significantly impact the residential areas. We did take input from the surrounding property owners, and that's where the majority of this list did come from. Also, to be sensitive to the neighborhoods, we have added that a restriction on the hours of operation. If we could go to the next slide, please. I did want to talk briefly about setbacks and height transitions with respect to the single family homes to our east. We do have that R4 boundary right to our east. With current UDO transitions, any building over 50 feet in height has to be set back a minimum of 50 feet from that R4 boundary. So under the current master plan, buildings under 50 feet could be built a lot closer to that, but since we are adding that height, I did want to point out that the current UDO standards do provide a pretty good setback if we are going for that higher height. Next slide, please. And this is just showing height transitions as well. The UDO currently does not allow us to start that 50-foot building right at that 50-foot setback line. We actually have to transition up. So the 5-story building will actually not start until about 90 feet away from that eastern R4 district boundary line. And the following slide, please. And just in conclusion, and I'll reserve the rest of my time for rebuttal, we are consistent overall with the comp plan, the future land use map, and we are compatible with the surrounding properties. So with that, I'll reserve my time and answer any questions you have. Thank you.
Thank you. I believe we have a number of members of the public signed up to speak. If we could start with unmuting the first speaker.
All right, the first speaker will be Brian Bordeaux.
Yes, good morning, and thank you for your time today. My name is Brian Bordeaux, and my wife Susan and I are one of the 2 adjoining property owners to this subject lot. We live at 8717 Colesbury Drive in Thorpeshire Farms. We purchased our home June 2001 when there were 17 acres of calm woods behind our home. Our research before the purchase showed the land was already designated as a master planned Falls Ridge development and knew there would someday be growth and development. The now called Subject Lot 2, also known as 2000 Falls Valley Drive, was then called part of Phase 1 and was approved for multifamily living units only, and was told to us it would be relatively high-end townhomes so as to make an appropriate transition between our residential neighborhoods, Thorpeshire Farms and Woodstone, and the other phases that would be doctor's offices, other office space, and retail at the front off Falls of Neuse Road. I completely object to rezoning Lot 2, 2000 Falls Valley Drive to mixed use entirely, as it would make transition to our residential homes a disaster on several levels, which we will outline. In addition to objecting to the mixed use, we need to point out that the original Phase 1, Phase 2, and Phase 3 combined were the cumulatively slated sections for residential dwellings not to exceed 100 units, not just that small portion that is now called Lot 2. Therefore, that total size of 12.4 acres as originally outlined for residential properties, but is now only 3.212 acres, or a reduction of 74.1% in land mass, should call for a reduction in number of living units from 100 to 25, based on the reduced land lot size. I yield my remaining time to our next speaker.
The next speaker is Russ Condry.
Good morning. Thank you for this opportunity to speak. Am I audible?
We hear you.
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, very good. Thank you. My name is Russ Condry. I live at 8804 Woodstone Drive, right across the traffic circle from the property. I've lived here since 1997, roughly 24 years. This is, as noted, this is not a rezoning, it's a re-rezoning. To restate an earlier phrase, it's the second bite of the apple. The property, as stated, was originally rezoned in February of 2000 with 4 lots. 3 have been commercially developed. The remaining lot, phase 1, lot 4, now being called phase 5, lot 2, same name on a different lot, whatever. In the 2000 master plan, this lot is required to be residential, and the neighborhood would like it to stay that way. This lot was planned and described to the neighborhood and in the 2000 master plan as a transitional area between the commercial area that they built first, closer to Falls of the Neuse, and it was to transition into the 2 neighborhoods. I personally, back in 2000, had the property owner, Mr. Jackson at that time, stand in my front yard, show me the master plan, and tell me that he was going to build $300,000 condos at that point in time on that lot. Now the request is to put a 5-story building on that lot. Every property that borders it, Brian's earlier, the 2 to the east, the houses across the street, even the houses across 540 are all 2-story houses or 1-story office buildings. There's no 5-story buildings in this area. There's no 4-story buildings in this area. So in fact, the only 5-story building in this area that is even close or on the north side of 540 is the hospital, and that's over a mile away. There's nothing consistent or transitional about this request. And how is a 5-story building supposed to be transitioned into a neighborhood of houses? The precedent of a 5 or even a 4-story building lacks total compatibility with the current surroundings.
Mr. Condry, I just wanted to note that your time was up if you wanted to finish your thought.
Okay. Yeah, in the 2000 rezoning, the owners got everything they wanted. That's enough. Please deny this request. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
The next speaker is David Finch.
Thank you. Just to reiterate, this is a rezone of a rezoned property by the same ownership group. There is a lot unknown about this request. For example, traffic. Traffic on this road is dangerous. I live right across the street from this property and see it firsthand. In addition to the traffic being dangerous, you have retail establishments on Falls Valley Drive that have never been filled. So when you add them being completely full, you add additional traffic, and then you have the traffic for the original zone and additional traffic that's being requested of this 5-story building. I believe a traffic study should have been done. One was not done, and thus this commission is being asked to approve something without a lot of information. The reason for this request is so this owner can sell this property. That is what's been told to us. However, between the first meeting we had as a neighborhood meeting and the third meeting we had, they actually broke this property up and sold part of it. That 1 proves it can be sold, and 2, as they stated before, this property has shrunk in the past 3 months, and thus has it been marketed? We don't know about the sellability of that. It doesn't seem logical for this commission to approve this, to add retail to this, and when there's retail that had been empty on this road for over a decade. In addition, $350,000 plus high-end townhomes It should be very marketable to this owner during our nation's and city's worst housing shortage ever. For those reasons, I beg you to deny this request. It's not logical, and it's a poor reason for a request. Thank you.
The next speaker is John Edelin.
Good morning. I'm John Edelin, 8808 Woodstone Drive. I represent the HOA for Woodstone neighborhood to the north of the site. The most of the points have been made that I would talk about today, so I won't reiterate in the interest of time. The point being that it appears to us that they're trying to circumvent the agreement that we've had with the developer from day one. So I don't feel like this plan makes sense from our point of view as residents of the area to build a 5-story building in which some of the houses in our neighborhood would be directly in the shadow of this building. The agreement we had with the setbacks, the 100 residential units, the 3-story height, that all makes sense. It would fit with the neighborhood profile and the surrounding areas. So we as a neighborhood collectively want to ensure that we let you guys know our displeasure and that we oppose this action. Furthermore, on the traffic issue that David brought up, none of our neighborhoods have sidewalks. So increasing traffic density in this area would be a major safety issue for our families, and another reason why we would hope that you guys oppose this action. That's all I have. Thank you.
All right, next we have Laura Hastings. Go ahead, Laura.
I have not planned to speak today.
Okay, sorry, I had you signed up to speak. Then next we have Rebecca Sadeka.
Yes, my name's Rebecca Sadaka. I was born in Raleigh and I've lived here for 38 years. And for the last 12, I've lived at 8805 Audley Circle, which is in close proximity to the parcel in question. Having been born here, I've raised my family here. I care deeply about our city, its future, and our neighborhoods. And I strongly oppose this rezoning request for a few reasons that I'll detail. First of all, as I've tried to get up to speed on what CX means, I read on the city website that CX is a mixed-use zoning that's intended to provide a greater range and concentration of uses compared to other mixed-use ordinances that make it well suited to commercial centers and corridors. The area that we're discussing is in no way a commercial center or a corridor. In fact, Falls Valley Drive transitions to Coxendale just south of this parcel, and it's entirely residential and runs for more than a mile through both Allison Pond and the Thorpeshire Farm neighborhoods, which are both zoned R4. Many of the permitted uses in the CX regulations, even if we exclude the ones that the application has indicated are high impact, are going to be in harsh contrast to the existing and adjacent homes in these neighborhoods. I'm also concerned, given the parcel size, it being just 3.2 acres now with these transmission lines running through it, there really isn't adequate space to do development that's allowed under the rezoning and successfully transitioned from commercial use with regards to like screening, buffers, handling water runoff from impervious surfaces. There's just not a lot of land to work with there. And so that concerns me because of the impact on these older neighborhoods that are part of Raleigh. I live in the Thorpeshire Farm neighborhood. Our neighborhood specifically has been through a lot. Our subdivision was divided by 540 in early 2000. We've had to deal with a lot of racist graffiti, drug use, and underage drinking that frequently occurs at a pedestrian bridge that's over 540 connecting the north and south parts of our neighborhood. Our children use that bridge on a regular basis, and Raleigh police frequently patrol that area. I feel that this activity is only going to get worse and require more city attention if non-residential based zoning is approved. Interestingly, Falls Ridge 3, the owner and applicant, owns an additional parcel that's not at the base of the bridge, which is not included in their rezoning application. And that parcel's not adequately maintained by those owners. Our neighbors pick up trash from that property on a weekly basis to help maintain our neighborhood. And we anticipate these issues only getting worse if the parcel is not developed as residential as was intended in the original PD. As a
Ms.
neighbor,
Sadaka, I'd like to note your time is up if you'd like to just finish your last thought.
yeah, I think it's been hard to respond to this request because there's so many options under CX zoning. It's just really hard to know the owner's intentions. And potentially there's a really negative impact on the city's taxable income because of the impact of property values for the surrounding lot. So I just request that you take these things into consideration and deny this application in its current state.
That was the final speaker.
Thank you. Now I'd like to allow for questions and comments from commissioners. Do any members have any questions or comments? Commissioner Daltel?
Thanks, Chair Fox. Yeah, it seems like as I'm looking at it, like the biggest source of issue here is the portion of the site that is on Coxendale Drive and is directly across the street from the single family homes there. And I'm curious if the applicant would in any way be open to some zoning conditions that would either restrict the height in some zone adjacent to that street or restrict uses or something to address that transition from that portion of the site to the single family homes across the street.
The applicant like to respond to that?
Yes, thank you, Commissioner Dautel. We are willing to take a look at either height, limitation there or some kind of transition along that Coxendale frontage. We are willing to take a look at that.
Thanks.
Are there any additional questions or comments from commissioners? Commissioner O'Haver?
Just a comment. I think that was Commissioner Daltel's concern was also mine. So I think other than that, I don't have any comments.
Okay, thank you. It sounds like we may be interested in deferring this case, and the applicant has offered providing additional conditions to address height transitions on Coxendale. Are there any other issues commissioners would like to put forth before I recommend deferring this case? Okay, seeing none, without objection, we're going to defer TCZ 5821. Just want to check in with the applicant. Would we be able to do that by the next Planning Commission meeting, or do we need to defer it to the February 8th meeting?
I'm looking at my calendar right now, and maybe Hannah can help me remember the rule. Do we have to have the revised conditions in 10 days before the 25th?
Correct.
That will be tight. We can definitely try. And then I guess I can let you, Chair Fox, know if we're unable to meet that deadline. I think I would have to have those in by Friday. I'm looking at my calendar correctly. We can definitely try to do that.
Okay, so hearing that, Mr. York?
To avoid having to re-advertise the Planning Commission's hearing, we need to defer it to a date specific. And so if we defer it to the next meeting, it'll have to appear on the agenda, but it may not be taken up if they haven't. I assume that's what you're looking at, putting it on the next meeting's agenda, but then not taking it up if the revised conditions haven't been submitted by the end of this week.
That would be our request, yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, and just to verify, our next meeting is January 25th, correct? Yeah. Okay, without objection, I'm going to defer the case TCZ 5821 to January 25th to allow the applicant to provide additional conditions related to height transitions along Coxendale. Commissioner Miller?
Second.
Excellent, thank you.
And I also had a question. Is there a way to let the neighbors and speakers know if we're not going to hear it so that they don't have to rearrange their schedules?
I believe we have their contact info now. I'll defer to staff on how they contact people who've previously signed up to speak.
Hey, this is Travis. Sorry, I'm not on camera. We certainly can reach out directly to the members to let them know when this will appear. However, we've been putting all this information on the website because there's a requirement to sign up before the meeting, and that typically happens the week before. So if the people who are interested in this case want to track it, they can just check the Planning Commission website and see whether or not it's on the agenda to be discussed.
Okay, thank you. And Commissioner Oates, I'm sorry, Mr. York?
No, I think from Bynum had chatted that it would, if the zoning conditions aren't in, it would appear on the agenda, but appear as a consent agenda item to be deferred to the next meeting. So they would need, if we're deferring it today to the 25th, it has to appear on the agenda somewhere. And so if it's in the consent agenda portion, to defer it to February 8th or whatever date, then it would not be discussed. And that's how the public will be notified of whether this case will be discussed. And then I guess there shouldn't be a sign up for consent agenda items. I'm not sure.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. I think, Mr. York, if you can just give me a thumbs up, I think we provided enough information to be able to defer this particular case. Okay. All right. With that, that concludes all the discussion items. However, I do believe I received a request to be on the record to clarify the deferral for case Z6121, which is the one along Edenton Street. The date certain for that is February 8th. Okay, and moving to approval of the minutes. The draft minutes of the December 14th, 2021 virtual planning commission meeting are included in the backup. Are there any edits or comments related to the minutes? Seeing none, I would like to entertain a motion to approve the meeting minutes from December 14th. Commissioner Rains?
Thanks, Chair Fox. I move to approve the draft December 14th, 2021 meeting minutes.
Okay, and do we have a second? Commissioner Miller?
Second.
Thank you. Commissioner Rains has offered a motion to approve the minutes. Commissioner Miller has offered a second. I will ask for a show of hands to record individual votes, and I will announce the outcome of the vote afterwards. So those in support of approving the minutes from the December 14th meeting, raise your hand. Any opposed? That motion passes unanimously. And now on to the report of the chairperson. I just have one item. As I understand it, staff recently inventoried all of the cases from 2021, and we are expecting a similarly robust program for rezoning in 2022. So moving into this year, I'd like to try and use all of the committees as effectively as possible to help get us through this load. Travis, I don't know if you have anything else to add to that in terms of the number of cases from last year or some of the metrics that you determined.
Sure, I'm happy to share information, and I appreciate the opportunity. So recently, we just documented all of our cases from the previous year, and we've been tracking these metrics through time. The one thing I would say is the Planning Commission has done an extraordinary job in navigating the volume that you've seen. So from an agenda standpoint, you saw a total of 156 different items on agendas throughout the year. We received as a staff 92 zoning cases for last year, which was the most number of zoning cases, the highest number that we have seen in 21 years. So we expect that trend to continue. I think it's a great idea to look at your committee structure to start filtering more and more cases to your subcommittees. We talked about that at your last retreat. That's a good strategy for helping deal with the high volume. On average, you're seeing just a little bit more than 7 discussion items per agenda, and you're deferring just about, on average, 28% of your agenda items. So, looking at the subcommittee structure and utilizing them to their fullest ability will help bring that deferral number down and potentially increase number of items that you see on your agenda. And we're happy to provide kind of a full report to you at a future meeting. We can put it in the director's report in your backup so you can just see a breakdown of the full metrics.
Thanks, Travis. Next, I'm going to move us on to report of commission members. Do any members have a report this week? Commissioner Bennett?
Thank you. I'm just announcing that the Infrastructure and Mobility Committee will be meeting on January 27th at 3. I believe it's immediately preceding the Committee of the Whole meeting. If you will not be able to attend, please let me and Travis or someone from staff know that you will not be there, so we'll know, we can ensure that we have quorum before the meeting, because we did move a case there, and I believe there was another agenda item already there. So one thing we may need to consider in the future, because that one comes right before Committee of the Whole, we have no flexibility to go late at all. So if it's anticipated that the agenda might start getting more robust, we might want to look at a different time, just so if we need to go over an hour, we'll have that flexibility. Thank you.
Thank you. Do any other commission members have a report? No. All right. Seeing none, we will move on to a report of the Deputy Planning Director, Mr. Bowers.
Sure. Thank you. At the last council meeting, there was only one item approved on the public hearing, and that was that comp plan amendment for the street plan out in the Chapel Hill Road area, which you had unanimously recommended approval for. Of the items you reported out in December, all of them are going to February 1st public hearing, except for the play structures text change, which is going to be heard next week at public hearing on January 18th. Also to be heard that day is the C-6820, the Hillsborough Street Bagwell Avenue case, which is still outstanding. That is also going to be discussed in the Safe, Vibrant, and Healthy Community Committee today, this afternoon. So that's an update on council actions. I don't have anything else to report. Thanks.
Thank you. All right. Is there anything else for the good of the order? All right. Seeing none, that concludes this meeting of the Planning Commission. Thank you, everyone.